Hello and welcome back to Tik-Tokophobia. Today we're going to be diving into a topic that is really, really interesting. Well, basically, we're going to be giving a name to an experience that has up until now not been named. I'm getting Voldemort vibes. But this is a really important experience for women that suffer from tocophobia and reproductive anxiety disorder. And it hasn't had a name. So when you think about names like panic attack and burnout, we know what those experiences are. And the RAD experience, the tocophobia experience, has some of those in it. And yet there are no names for these experiences. And that is what we're going to be talking about today, giving a name to these powerful experiences that signal awareness and a shift in how you see the experience that you're living through and how you experience that. Is that fair to say? Is that what we're doing here today, JJ?
I think so. And so, just stay with us. It's going to be really interesting, actually, because we'll share some of our experiences as well as we go through. And it's been one of the key issues that we have experienced with this issue, this disorder, is not being able to give a name to any of it.
Yeah.
So here we go.
Yeah. So, JJ, today we're going to be sharing something that we've never really talked about like this before. In fact, something that's never been talked about like this before, not just between you and I, but ever. Because we're going to be giving a name to something that has up until now not had a name. And so, just for those listening, think panic attacks, think burnouts, think breakdowns, think meltdowns, all of those words are really clear in terms of what they mean. People know what you mean when you say I've had a panic attack. They get that. They understand the extremity of it, how hard that must have been for you. Other people can relate who have also had a panic attack. So it enables you to find support, to talk about your experience and know that other people understand what you've been going through. So it's that we want to start introducing to the tocophobia experience.
Yeah, because one of the issues that we've noticed in the past is that you find yourself struggling to find the words to explain what you've been going through. So we've decided to give this experience some words of its own.
Yeah. And for me, I think it really crystallized for me that this needed a word when I was working with a client and like I asked, I said, where does it, what was the moment for you? And she goes, it was seeing those 2 lines on the pregnancy test. And when she said that, I was like, I know that feeling. I've seen those 2 lines. And that's a gut punch. And you've seen those 2 lines and you had the gut punch. And even just the minute she said it now, and it's coming back to me, and I could feel it, the viscerality of that, if viscerality is a word. That
I don't
2
think it is,
lines
but it doesn't
moment,
matter.
that 2 lines moment is a moment that is not just a weird moment that I had on my own that's never been felt by any other woman ever. It's a thing.
Right.
And it was a thing that you experienced. And here I was talking to a client and it was a thing that she experienced.
Yeah.
And so I started calling it the 2 lines moment, which is really rubbish because you need to come up with an actual word, right? And so this is where all of this came from. It was a need to put words to something that needed a word. And it also reminded me of one of my favorite books ever by Douglas Adams called The Meaning of Life. And you like Douglas Adams, don't you, JJ?
Big fan.
And he wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, for those that don't know. But he also wrote a brilliant book called The Meaning of Life. And the premise behind The Meaning of Life was that there are loads of words that spend their whole life on signposts, never being used, basically little quaint English villages. And then there are experiences, vast experiences, numbers of experiences out there that don't have a word for them. And so he started pairing the 2 together. And so this book is just, you read lots of English villages that you know about, and then you start reading about experiences. You go, oh my goodness, yes, yes. So like when people in the summer turn over their pillow to get the cool side of the pillow, he calls that the Abilene. And it's like, oh, the Abilene. So it's brilliant fun to read this book. But that was a bit of an inspiration for me in terms of we need to start bringing words in, giving words to experiences that don't have a word, so that we're not constantly coming up with this. For me, saying two lines moment every 5 minutes, and that
Yeah.
sounds silly. What does that mean?
Yeah.
So that's where this was really coming from for me.
Yeah.
And actually, as I was we spent a bit of time talking about this and
A lot of time talking about it, actually.
and debating it, because the two lines moment, actually, there's a lot within that idea of two lines,
Yeah.
because it really signifies this, almost this moment where, let's imagine you're on one trajectory. Like for me, when I had my two lines moment, I was put my career first. I'm not a paternal person. I'm not a baby mother. I'm not going to be a mother. There's this narrative, this sense of who I was and where my life not was going, but like the track I was on, if you like. And then suddenly I was made aware of this other line that just kind of emerged out of the shadows. Like, no, there's something else going on here. This isn't who you think you were. And this two line moment, suddenly I ricocheted and bounced off and headed into a totally different direction. A new line emerged in terms of my sense of who I was, what I was grappling with. And so there's more going on here than just the two lines on the test. There's this two lines in terms of the trajectory of your life and this rupture and realization of where you were and now where you are, and how you try and reconcile that.
Yeah, it's like a fork in the road, isn't it? Because if you take one path, then you're never going to know what the other path was like. You're kind of leaving the old behind, and so you're confronted with these two lines, and then what happens?
Yeah.
For a lot of us, there's this sheer panic, more than panic, even more than panic for some of us, and that we've had to give another name to. We'll talk about that.
Yes. So that moment, there's that moment where I saw those two lines, and that was, and people would have heard me speak about this moment a lot if you've been listening to my Fearfully Childbirth podcast, but it really did feel like a gut punch. It was a visceral, and I just wanted the world to swallow me whole. When you had that moment, you describe it as abject terror,
mm-hmm.
and so that clearly was visceral. It was a collapse, and this client that I've been working with recently, she said, I just collapsed to the floor. I felt my whole world collapsed. I just fell. And when she said the word fell, you know that she didn't just fall to the floor. You know that her whole world fell at that moment. And
exactly.
that really is a very powerful, visceral moment that needs language, right?
Yeah.
You can't kind of, for so many women experiencing this throughout the world, we have to name this so that women can start talking about this together and sharing it and realizing they're not crazy and they haven't lost it and they're not broken. This is just symptomatic of reproductive anxiety disorder, which is, we've got an episode on that for you to listen to. And so this is where this need to create language around this so that we can talk about it and then heal from it, right?
Yeah. So we should say what the word is.
Okay. Well, we've actually come up with two words, haven't we? Because it's not just two lines, is it?
No.
And so the moment, there's this, so the two lines moment at the beginning, I was really interested in incorporating the idea of two lines in the word. And so obviously we're looking like, when you think about tokophobia, it's rooted in the Greek, and we've got lots of words in our language that are rooted in the French, that are rooted in Greek, rooted in Latin, we borrow from other languages. So we naturally went to other places, other languages, to look for inspiration. And after a lot of debating and chatting and reviewing and all that, we've settled on the word Dilinea. And I'll spell that for you, Dilinea. And so you'll probably hear within there that there's the word line hiding in there, linear, and D for two. But I mean, you had a little bit of an issue with this at first, didn't you, JJ? Just share us where your little...
Oh, I did, because di, meaning two, is the Greek prefix, and whereas if it's a Latin prefix going in front of a Latin derived word, it should be de. linear, and I just thought that sounded too much like delineated. But on reflection, I actually think it's a good compromise. It's a good word for
Yeah.
it, because it does represent the two lines. It does represent the fork in the road kind of idea, and that having to make that choice, it ultimately, or not, as the case may be, if we're talking about tocophobia. So you do have that sort of, the tocophobia is from the Greek toko, meaning giving birth, I believe. And so you have that Greek element in there, and you have you have that. I mean, Greek and Latin, they are so intricately associated with medical conditions anyway. I think it's quite nice that we use something like that. But then the other word that we came up with is neither.
No, it's not.
Except that, does it have a Latin root?
It might have a Latin root, but I mean, I'm half French. Those of you that maybe follow my work for a while, you'll know. And so this came to me quite easily. And I wanted, the linear sounds really soft and long.
Yeah.
When you say it, it's got a kind of a gentleness sound to it. Whereas, so even though it describes this rupture and realization really well. And also when I think about Dilinea, and we were just chatting before we came on air, and I was saying it's almost like when you go skiing and you have your two skis, and then at the beginning there's one ski that starts slightly going it's not parallel anymore, and there's one ski going off, and you can only maintain that situation for a while before it all goes terribly wrong and you're out on your face on the slope.
Yeah.
And
you
so
feel
when
like you're being split apart. You feel
yeah,
like
exactly. And so when that moment happens, that's the casse. That's the other word, right? The casse. And that comes from French casser, which is to break. And that really does speak to the break, the collapse that you
yeah.
feel when you get that punch of of seeing the two lines. And so it could be like the way that the Dilinea moment, like the skiing, you might feel that something's off for a while. You're like, oh, okay, I don't want to hold babies. Yeah, no, I'm not maternal. No, I'm not really up for those baby conversations you ladies are having over there. I'm gonna go and read my book over here. As you sort of start pulling yourself away or noticing aspects of your life where you don't feel the same as other women, you don't get excited about pregnancy or babies or whatever that is. And so you get these little like clues, if you like, but they don't mean anything because you have no idea that there's this thing that all means, right? So you just put it down to you being a bit weird, right? Oh, that's just not who I am. But eventually, but then a moment happens where it becomes, you can't ignore it. And so for me, that moment was seeing the two lines on a pregnancy test. It's like, and actually for me, maybe it wasn't that. That was part of it. But then it was when I felt relief at my miscarriage.
Mm.
That was when I was like, oh, there's definitely something going on here. This needs attention.
Yeah, and that's such a visceral thing. It's such an enormous experience. It was for me anyway, that I felt that Dilinea was a bit too soft for that. I thought that was
Yeah.
I thought it had to be something harder. And I was thinking more of a kind of an Anglo-Saxon word, maybe, because those tend to be the sort of more earthy, harder words in English.
Yeah.
But when you came up with the casse from casse, I thought, yeah, I like that, definitely.
Yeah.
It's short, sharp, and it's really punchy, and that's what this issue is, when you feel that breaking apart
Yeah.
within you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so
just
that,
going with the skiing analogy, you could be skiing like that for a while your legs are going apart, but the minute that's untenable, that's the casse.
yes,
That's when
exactly.
suddenly you realize that this is a whole different situation that you
Yeah,
hadn't
and
quite.
you have to go down because there's no other way to go. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no way it can carry
Yeah.
on. And so that's how and so really like the linear it can be a slow creep.
Mm.
It can be emerging over a while, like I suspect, for women that are kind of early 20s, they're maybe not thinking about kids at that point unless they're in a serious relationship already. And so they're not really on it's not on their radar. But maybe heading into their mid 20s, late 20s, when others are getting married and maybe the kids are showing up, they start to maybe think, hang on, okay. And so it could be this slow emerging, this thing sort of loitering in the shadows of your life that you kind of know there's something there, but you can't quite see it, put your finger on it, understand it. And then suddenly it pops out, it jumps out of the shadows one day. And that's the cast moment where it becomes real.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there are different responses, aren't there, as well? I mean, you might just completely freeze, or you might just feel so sick. You know, it's those visceral responses that are a clue to whether or not you've got that. Maybe you feel like numb, you know, and you just go completely numb. But
yeah,
you you tend to feel there's some kind of potential life or death experience going on here. I mean, a bit like when you can't control your skis, you're going down a mountainside and you're going fast, and oh,
yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah,
um, or if you know, if you're suddenly struck with a terror because you're facing something so horrendously frightening,
yeah,
that's the fear as well. It's where you kind of can't move. You're struck dumb.
exactly. And when some, some women experiences in that is they do feel like they have just the world, they've just been swallowed whole by
Yeah.
something. And
Yeah.
I know that I felt like I've been like I just think about, I feel like I fell into a dark pit of terror. Um, you know, like in Dante's Inferno or whatever, like this kind of hell
Mm.
where I couldn't see a way out. And
Yeah.
and I was like, my miscarriage gave me a way out. And some women don't have that. They have to create that way out for them. And we're going to be talking about that on another episode.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah,
because
there's this feeling of being completely trapped and paralyzed.
yeah,
It's a paralysis almost.
yeah,
And you know, and when you don't have any words to use to describe it, I mean, how do you get through to people that this is what you're going through? So
yeah,
hopefully these words will help us.
yeah. I know, because it isn't a panic attack. If you get to go to your therapist and say, they say, well, was it a panic attack? You're like, Not really, because it isn't. It is enough of a unique experience
Yeah.
that it does need a way for us to talk about it. And it's interesting. I only started kind of like sharing it quite recently, within on my website, and within, I think I put a blog up introducing the idea, and within, I don't know, less than 24 hours of that blog going up, I got a message from somebody, and in it they wanted to they look at working together, and in it they said, I think I'm going through my Dilinea moment. And immediately she resonated with it and knew exactly what that was, and was like, yeah, that's what I'm going through. And that crystallized it for us, didn't it? We were like, okay, we need to
It
talk about
did.
this. We need to make
Yeah.
this a thing, because it clearly is being, there's a need for it already. The fact that there's that kind of response. So now this is us like officially announcing it, basically, is
Yeah,
that is.
it is.
So yeah, Dilinea is like the crack emerging, whereas the cas is when it finally gives way. It's the
Yeah.
bit where, suddenly it can't be, you can't contain it anymore. You can't, or maybe, we talked about this again before. It's like, you can't brush it under the carpet anymore. Although, can you,
You can
JJ?
try. You can try. You can try your damnedest to do that. Yeah. I think I did it quite successfully for a long time.
Yeah,
But yeah. But again, it's because there are no words to describe it. You don't know what you're going through. And the tendency then, for me anyway, was to, oh, just push that away. Just
yeah,
forget that. It happened, let it go.
yeah,
But really, if we have the word for it, if we know what we're going through, then we can do something about it.
yeah. Exactly, because I know that when I was going through that experience, like the fact that there wasn't a word, and I thought that I was crazy and alone in what I was feeling, and that this wasn't a normal, not normal. I hate the use of the word normal because it just
No, I
means
know.
nothing. But an experience that was, that a lot of people have. I thought this was just something that I was going through because I was weird in some way.
Yeah.
And whereas if I knew that that was something that, oh, that's, some people go through this, right? Okay. It's like when people realize they've got ADHD, like, oh, right, okay, I've got ADHD, right. Well, I'm going to go and see an ADHD, but
Now I know what I can
whatever.
do about it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Now now I can go and find things and help and whatever. I can try and address it. Whereas when you're lost in that place where you're just this weirdo with this weird experience, and you can't even talk about it, it forces you to kind of hold on to it and
Yeah.
bury it or hide it or ignore it. And actually that's just going to show up in other ways.
Yeah.
You can't ignore that kind of stuff. You can try, but it's still going to show up. And push its way through in other ways in your life
Might
that
take a
may.
long time. It does. In my case, it took an awful long time. But yeah, no, it is important to name things.
Yeah,
Yeah, because when you what was the quote? I shared a quote, a Carl Jung quote with you the other day about bringing the unconscious into the conscious, and
yeah,
that's when you can actually let things go and deal with things.
yeah,
Giving something a name is doing just that. It's
yeah,
bringing something from the unconscious into the conscious so that you can deal with it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, when I think about these two concepts, I don't think everyone is going to have both, because it could be that somebody has got Dilinea, that sort of creeping dread idea. And whereas for others, it could be the cast that triggers Dilinea, that kind of they go,
Yeah.
oh, okay. And then suddenly they start realizing, like, oh my God, is that why I da da da? And they start like noticing and putting two and two together, and things just kind of click into place. And maybe the delineate for them is this kind of almost a crystallization and an understanding of why all these things they had been brushing under the carpet. Now and that realization as they start processing all that consciously and they're like, oh my goodness, this is I've got to start dealing with this because my partner now is saying, I said we were going to have kids at this time, and suddenly it all starts becoming a little bit more real and processed in a more conscious and deliberate way. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, you might not have both. One might trigger the other, one might not. Again, the thing with tocophobia is, which is why it needs to be renamed. And again, we've got our episode on RAD for that to explain why, is because the experiences that women have are so varied and so different that that we to try and pin this down, like the idea of tocophobia. If you think about people's spider phobias or fear of flying, those experiences tend to be very similar from one person to the next.
Yeah, and you can see the thing, and you know that you're that's what you're frightened of, and you have that phobia of that thing. So
Then
you
it
can
makes
deal with that.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And if you go and see a phobia specialist, they'll be able to treat that super easily because most people respond to spiders
yeah.
in the same way if they've got a spider phobia, whereas tocophobia doesn't behave like other phobias. It doesn't. It's not because it's not a phobia.
I
Spoiler
was going to
alert.
say it's not a phobia. Not a
More
phobia.
on that in another episode. And so again, with the cast and the delineate, they are because of the wide range of these experiences that women have around this means that some might have the cast, some might have delineate, some might have both,
Yeah.
but it's now the point of all of this is giving these experiences words so that we can now start talking about them. And I remember I shared the Dilinea concept with a client of mine, and immediately she came back and went, oh, no, 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 and then just wrote a whole thing about what her Dilinea moment was. And I was like, yeah, this really does resonate. We really need to do
Yeah.
this. So this is why
Yeah.
we're doing this. So this is why we're giving it these names. So just to kind of recap again, the CAS is CASS. It's the CAS, the break, and Dilinea, DILINIA. Two lines, or two trajectories, the rupture and the realization of how you feel and what it means for you and the life that you're living.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Simple, really.
It
And
is.
and for anybody who's saying, well, who are you to make up words about things? Well, everybody throughout time has made up words about things.
That's how we're here. There was some bloke once who made up the word tocophobia. A
I
guy,
know exactly.
right?
A
So,
bloke. Yeah,
like,
exactly.
yeah, let's not go there. So here we are, two women who have lived this. We're coining this and giving it words because
Yeah.
these words are important and they're powerful. They enable us to talk about these experiences. And that is the first road to healing, right? And what we want more than anything is women to be able to heal from this. If that's what
Absolutely.
they want, if that's what they choose, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, do you think that's a good place to
I
end
think
this?
that's a good place to write. Yeah, I don't think there's any more we need to say. So just really, I think anybody, if this does resonate with you, I would love to hear your cast moment, love to
Yeah,
hear your
let us
delineate
know.
moment. And I think if we are able to start sharing that with each other, talking about that, then that can really start spreading that to other women so that they can they now realize that these experiences that they may have kept quiet, that they may have kept inside of them, do have words to describe them, and they can now start talking about that, because also just talking about that and feeling seen, feeling
I was just going to
understood.
say, yeah, I
So
was just going to say, share it, get it out there. You'll
yeah,
be absolutely amazed how good that is for us all, just to
yeah,
share these stories. Yeah.
exactly. So, and I'm sure there are women that you know that are that feel like this. They just haven't been open about it because they don't know how it's going to be received. That's the thing with women that suffer tocophobia, is they don't talk about it because they think they're crazy. They think they're not going to be understood, and so that you might know more women like that than you realise.
Yeah. Because nobody does talk about it. And well, nobody has been talking about it much until now, right?
Yeah,
And we're changing that. And when nobody talks about something, then you don't know. It was a similar thing to when I was going through menopause. And nobody told me that when you go through menopause, often women have to stop drinking alcohol because your body can't handle it anymore because your body's not managing it. I didn't realize until I was well through, I'd had to give up alcohol. I was going well through my menopause. And I said to somebody, I don't know, I've had to give it up. And she said, oh, yeah. I said, what do you mean, oh, yeah? She said, oh, yeah, happened to me, happens to everybody. I said, well, how come nobody says this is one of
yeah.
the events? It's crazy that we don't talk about these things.
And now I know the no alcohol thing. Damn, you told
Doesn't
me.
happen to everybody, but it is a thing which I
It's a
had no
thing.
idea about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so we'll wrap it up there. So, please share this episode with the women in your life, and also if you've had your Delinea moment or your cast moment, then do share that too. And I'd love to hear more about that. So, thank you.
Yeah, and I would too. And just remember, there is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. It's you're not broken.
All
It's
crazy.
just some or crazy. No, it's just something that we can absolutely deal with now that we know
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. All right. Until next time. Bye.
Bye bye.